You're listening to the Cash Flow Academy podcast with Andy Tanner, your source for investing made easy. Here's Andy Tanner.
Welcome to the Cash Flow Academy podcast. I'm Andy Tanner. This is where investing is made simple. Very, very powerful guest today. Great show on deck. We have Jared Tendler, and he is the author of The Mental Game of Trading, Step-by-Step System for Mastering Trading Psychology. And one of the reasons we're so grateful to have Jared with us is many things are counterintuitive. The game of poker is counterintuitive. The game of basketball is counterintuitive. And the game of trading is also counterintuitive. We have many times where we'll have moments of choice where logic would say do one thing, but my emotions are going to tell me to do another thing. And when we realize that we can master those types of things, it's going to improve what we do, especially when we start actively, that we decide to go from passive to active management of stocks. So with that brief introduction, I'll get right to it. Jared, thank you so much for being a guest today on the podcast.
Thanks, Andy. Good to be here.
Now your background is pretty cool because you've served as head of sports psychology for different eds. You're one of the best mental coaches in the world. I'll just say that. I'll let you talk a little bit about your background, but you have a master's degree in counseling psychology. You have a license of a mental health counselor, which was good news to my wife. She said, when you interview him, be sure to lay down on a couch, Andy. Maybe he can, maybe you can work out some of your problems. But Jared, tell us a little bit about your journey and how you became an expert in this field of psychology.
Yeah, I'd say I'm a trained therapist, but that was not my intent. I wanted to be an athlete. I wanted to be a professional golfer. And in my freshman year of college, tried to qualify for the U.S. Open after having a successful freshman season where I won twice and basically choked. I missed the playoff by a shot to get into the second stage of the U.S. Open qualifying, which is effectively a small PGA Tour event because so many of the tour pros have to actually qualify for the Open. And I played great tee to green, but putting was my weak spot, and that's where mentally I broke down. So I kind of dove into sports psychology, golf psychology at that point, steadily got better as a player. Won 9 times in college, 3-time All-American, but I still choked in big moments like that. So I decided to go off and get the degrees and licensures that you mentioned, never with the intent to practice. As soon as I got my license, I quit my job, flew out to Arizona and started working with golfers, trying to combine the techniques and tools that therapists use to solve problems, along with the sports psychology material that was out there that, for me, helped, but not in those critical moments where, you either win or lose, or as a trader, as an investor, these critical moments where you have to make potentially kind of game-changing decisions. That's where, I wanted to have answers to be able to solve for myself selfishly. Maybe I could still have a career, but, if not, then I'd have a career as a coach, and that's kind of what it's turned into. Started working with golfers, built up a roster, then ironically met a poker player who, was a former professional golfer himself. We kind of hit it off. I started working with him. He introduced me to this online poker world where there was nobody doing what I was doing. So there was just sort of this huge market that I was able to kind of dive into. Wrote The Mental Game of Poker 1 and 2. Traders started buying the book and, noticed that you could just basically change the word poker to trading and that would apply. And then I got into esports, worked with one of the best pool players in the world. I've worked with a radiologist, entrepreneurs, you name it. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about removing the negative effects that emotion has on decision making. And if you can do that, then you're going to perform great regardless of what you're trying to accomplish.
I love your story for a couple of reasons, and I'll just comment on this if I can. I think the listeners will appreciate this. Number one is you have a personal passion for what you're doing. A lot of people go into a field, I want to be an anesthesiologist. Why? Well, they just make a lot of money. But this was very personal to you. And when a person, has a personal attachment to what they're doing, they generally have a chance to become very, very good at it. And then the second thing I thought was great was you didn't say the other golfers beat you. You didn't say that. You said, hey, I had moments where I choked, and that's kind of tough because when I go to, I coach a lot of basketball, And I have a hard time with parents and players that say, well, the refs are screwing us, or they're dirty, or, that they get a victim mentality instead of saying, hey, what can I do to improve? And when you said I choked, in life, whether it's poker or trading or business or marriage, we're often our own worst enemy. And when we can understand that, maybe our machinery, evolution's done some pretty cool things for us. We view ourselves as maybe the chief of the planet here, but we have emotions and blind spots and delusions, and our minds are evolved. They weren't designed perfectly. So when a trader begins to say, okay, I'm going to put money at risk, there's greed, there's fear of missing out on something big, there's panic, fear of losing what you got. So the mental game is the priority. It is the thing. And mastering that is your opportunity. So, what's the root of all this? Where would you start if you're going to sit down with someone who's new or have traded even for a while maybe, and you were to sit down with them and say, I have a step-by-step system. What premise or framing or context would you build to speak with that person?
Yeah, there's two things. First, we got to recontextualize their understanding of emotion, and the first priority there is to understand that emotions are signaling the problem. They are not the problem. It's very easy to observe all the chaos that gets created by it, the carnage and the losses that result from it. But the emotions are a symptom of an underlying flaw. Now, we're not talking about personal issues, okay? I certainly deal with them at times, right? Sometimes the work I do with my clients kind of pigeonholes into that. However, in the book, I talk about 28 different performance flaws that are endemic across all performance environments. And they're very, entrenched and hard to identify. And the book is sort of designed to help you identify which one you're struggling with. But we're talking about, let's say, expectations of perfection, high expectations in general, confirmation bias, the illusion of control, black and white thinking, having a weak process in how you make decisions. Right? These are basic performance flaws that exist. And when those flaws interact in certain situations, like an opportunity is moving in the market and suddenly you feel that FOMO, right? The FOMO is just a signal that, for example, you have a desire for perfection. Like, you can't miss out on an opportunity because you expect yourself to capitalize on every single one of them, right? The emotion is signaling that expectation of perfection. So what we then need to do is to break down and correct the expectation of perfection. But that process, as I just described, is not as simple as I just said it, right? So the first thing we have to do is, again, identify and understand that emotions are signaling deeper problems, and so that should automatically start to cue you to start asking questions in these moments where you are failing. And if you ask those questions, then you can begin to create a map. What are the situations where they typically occur? What are the thoughts that occur in those situations, right? When, let's say you get stopped out by a couple ticks and then, it races off without you, or, you had this intuition that you should have, let's say bought Tesla at 100 and you didn't. And then now it's at 150, 180, 300, you just never got in. And so you're kind of kicking yourself with self-criticism for missing that opportunity. We're looking at the emotions, we're looking at the situations, we're looking at the thoughts, we're looking at the way in which you make decisions. If you can map that, you create these very key spots that are going to continue to happen again and again and again. The good thing is these problems happen in patterns. The bad thing is they keep repeating until you do something to change it. So in the near term, we're going to use that information to help understand what that underlying flaw is or flaws. And then you can devise a strategy in real time that can help you to at least prevent some of the severity of the decisions, and over time actually fundamentally eliminate some of the emotional volatility that you'll experience in those moments.
That's the holy grail. I mean, to be able to, to land where you just ended in eliminating some of that emotional volatility. I've worked very hard, and this is not just about trading. This is about life. Emotional intelligence and being aware of what I'm feeling and having sort of a concentration or a habit of noticing my state has been huge for me as a father, in my relationship with my wife, Often when I do something dumb, it's because I got in an emotional state that I was unaware of. That I wasn't concentrating. Man, I'm a little bit gleeful here. I might say something dumb, or I'm really, really angry here. I might make a decision that's rash. So this recontextualizing that you talk about of seeing our emotions as signals of something deeper, I think that's a big step for that. So can you give me an example of, you gave me a great example of FOMO. I see people on Reddit going to trade GameStop, and I don't have any experience in trading, and I'm brand new, but I'm going to open up a Robinhood and participate because I feel a desire to make that money, but maybe I don't have the logic and the knowledge to recognize I'm not ready. What is the most common mental game or problems that someone might face?
Yeah, I'd say the more common ones are fear and anger. I think in the market, we tend to kind of oversimplify it as greed and fear. But when we look at when we look at greed, and we sort of strip away the societal connotation or impact of greed, and we look at it purely as a performance problem, then greed kind of disappears as something that's that consequential. I'm not saying that people don't experience it. What I'm saying is that it's not a unique emotion, that the underlying flaws that we're talking about here, will produce greed. So you can use it as a signal, but there aren't any unique flaws to it. And at the end of the day, what are we really even talking about? Your job as a trader, your desire is to make money. Yeah. Money's the scoreboard. So it's we'd never say that, Jordan, Tiger Woods, pick an athlete was greedy because they wanted to win a lot.
Yeah.
So
that's a great way to put it.
But every one of those athletes I mentioned can still make greedy decisions at times that are suboptimal for them in the long run. So we're trying to find that line between. I think fear and anger are two of the big ones.
Let's hit that greed a little harder. And because I need help to teach my sons better. So the way I put it to my sons is this: is I say, one way to think about it is to always be bigger than your money. And what I try to help him explain that is if you're in a situation, I'll give you an example. Let's say someone comes to you with a shady deal, and he's a shady person. He's just been paroled, but it looks like there's a chance for a big score. That's when your desire for money, that desire to get more money, begins to grow bigger than your logic or your ethics or your person. Or let's say that you're looking at position size and you're saying, well, this is a good trade. I'm going to load up a little bigger simply because I want to buy a new boat. The desire to win and make money now has become bigger than your rationale and your smarts and your rules for position size. And so when I think of that desire, there's nothing wrong with the desire. But if Michael Jordan, wants to get championship number 7, and his desire to that gets so blind and so central and so deep that he begins to self-sabotage, you got to stay bigger than your money. Is that close, or can I improve upon that?
You're definitely close. I think we can get a little deeper.
Awesome.
I think the big thing you're missing is to train your son, train others to make sound decisions. And how do you actually do that? I think it's probably embedded in what you're talking about with him. But when you look at the opportunity, like you mentioned, what's the decision-making process even look like? If it only includes, I'm going to make a lot of money, then it's very, very likely to be a bad decision, right? Because you're not even considering the downside risk, right? What happens if things go wrong? What's the opportunity cost of your time, your energy? We're not even talking about just the monetary factor here. So, you have to be training a more robust system for making decisions. And yeah, we're going to make lots of mistakes in that process. But if you look at the decision-making process for investment decisions, for trading decisions, they become equal in my mind to the technique that Jordan has in terms of how he shoots jump shots, to the way that Tiger Woods, makes a putting stroke or a golf swing, right? There's technique to how you do it, and the cleaner that process is, the easier it is to test and identify how well it's actually operating in the world, right? And the big difficulty with investment decisions, with trading decisions, which is a lot like poker and a lot unlike most sports, is the amount of short-term luck, right? The volatility and the variance that it's involved in the short term, you're going to get a lot of false feedback. And you have to know independently, are you actually making good decisions that are yielding some advantage or edge in the market and leading to profit, or are you actually just making bad decisions and you're just basically just getting butt-ass lucky? And the market's just like, in your favor at this time, and it might end up costing you a lot more in the long run if you keep making decisions like that. So I think training your decision-making process is sometimes can be a bit overwhelming, but I think the most basic way to start that is to just ask yourself, what are the downsides? What's the real kind of range of results that might happen here, right? It's not just going to be, I'm going to win the lottery in this and I'm going to make a windfall. It's, it could go poorly, lower than that, and still end up profitable. Is it worth it if it's just that? And then what if it actually does go bad? What are the range of opportunities? If you start thinking about those range of potential outcomes, you automatically start making better decisions.
You said some important things, I think, for new traders and maybe even intermediate ones that I'd like to highlight and comment on a little bit. Is that trading can be very volatile, and the market moves in really weird and almost random ways. And I would just say maybe the same thing you said this way is, I have a guy on my team named Corey Halliday who is an options principal for a firm for years. So he's managing the risk of a floor of, about 175 traders. And all these traders are going out and doing their own thing, and it's his job to make sure they don't burn the firm down collectively, right? And so so he's an option principal. So I would take him. I would rather take a guy like Corey, and I put a bunch of stocks on a board and throw darts at him and invest in those just blindly with his risk management system, right? Of what's the worst that can happen? What are my hedges? What are my probabilities? Than the person who thinks they have a crystal ball. And I think that's one of the big mistakes traders make, is they think falsely that great traders have an insight on the future, and they don't. We call Buffett the Oracle of Omaha. He never called himself that, by the way. We think these people that can see into the future supposedly is the holy grail. It's not. It's exactly what Jared is talking about, people. It is your ability to look at possibilities of downside, possibilities of upside, and manage those probabilities effectively. It's a huge thing. So that's just awesome stuff.
Yeah, and I would say, to kind of build on that too, the prediction kind of functionality exists within all of us, and it's a good thing, right? The difference is that people think their predictions are factual reality, and I call them shitty psychics.
Yeah.
They think that they actually can predict the future. And sometimes it's kind of strange, but sometimes people who actually go through, some drawdowns or have some tough times, and this is true personally as well, they're actually in a bad mental state, depressed or down, sad, etc., because they're overconfident.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds strange to say this, but they think that they know what's going to happen and it's going to be bad. They think that tomorrow they're going to lose. They think this position is going to go against them, and so they should just get out now. They're wrong about their predictions, both in a good way and in this case in a bad way. And so if you can understand that your predictions are just estimates and not factual realities, then you become a lot better at figuring out how your estimation can start to prove profitable. You're 100% right. Traders, investors they do not have the ability to predict the future. They have the ability to estimate the future with higher probabilities of success than everybody else.
I was in my very first mentor, his name was Rhett, and I took my very first class on investing way back in the 90s. And he got up and he said, "Did you learn about this in school?" And they said, "No." He said, "Well, one exception. If you wanted to take one class to be good at this, become a psychology major." That's what he said. I remember it clearly. And so I'm going to tell everyone right here, go to Amazon.com. The book is called The Mental Game of Trading, a step-by-step system for mastering trading psychology. This is going to be a staple in the trader's library. That's my prediction and my estimate. Because after doing this and being a student for 30 years, it's the biggest thing. The person's context changes on what they think they know. And if we could acknowledge some, I don't want to call it flaws in our machinery, but there just is. how does confirmation bias work in this? Because that's a huge problem, I think. Almost everybody that has any kind of delusion, it seems that confirmation bias weaves its way in. You mentioned that as one of those 28 things to watch for. The need to be right in trading, right? The need to be able to tell your buddy that, yeah, I knew this was going to happen. I knew that this stock was going to jump. Look how smart I am because I got in. And yet there's 20 other trades where he got his ass kicked where he isn't bragging about it. So our need to be right. Can you talk about our addiction or our basic evolutionary need to be right?
Yeah, I mean, you actually framed that perfectly. So confirmation bias is one of those biases that you'll oftentimes hear cognitive psychologists talk about because it's one of these cognitive biases that exist. And I would say that the departure in my book and in my perspective is that we can actually get to the root of it and make it not a problem, right? Not just something that we can be aware of and avoid, but actually something that we can fundamentally correct. Because if you look at the way that you actually frame the issue, it's all about confidence, right? There is an underlying weakness in that trader that they need to be, let's say, seen, in a positive light by their peers. They need to be viewed by their own selves to be successful, right? And so if we can kind of isolate these weaknesses in confidence, then it becomes actually possible to correct confirmation bias, which, ultimately is just you wanting to be right rather than seeking truth, which is really what you ought to be doing.
I'm taking notes, writing down these things, and I'm writing this down. Seeking truth. You've got to say that again, if you would. Seeking truth rather than wanting to be right.
Then the need for you to be right.
The need.
So, yeah, because at the end of the day, right, you talk about maybe some hesitancy in calling these flaws. Like, let's just, I think emotional intelligence, my passion for this, all centers around truth seeking. I wanted to know why I was choking, right? And it wasn't at the end. I mean, this is like kind of the classic entrepreneurial track, right? I saw a problem that wasn't being served, and I wanted to find a better way, and I found a better way. So here's the better way, right? We understand that truth seeking is the only way to firmly unlock your worst. You talked about self-sabotage and us being our own worst enemy. The reason that occurs, the reason that is because we don't understand the flaws that trip us up, right? We don't understand what exists at the back end. It's so easy for people when they make big mistakes to just, brush it aside and say, oh, that's so unlike me. That's a one-off. It's not going to happen again. And yet what happens? It happens time and time again. When you firmly embrace your own weaknesses, your own, flaws, you actually have the opportunity to fix them. If they remain in the dark, you cannot actually progress. And what a lot of traders, a lot of investors, a lot of people don't understand from a performance standpoint, that stuff holds you back. There's a concept in the book I talk about called inchworm. And now inchworm, if you're not familiar with it, is based off of a caterpillar that actually moves like a walking bell curve. Okay, so it's not like something that crawls on the ground like a caterpillar. It actually kind of lifts up the back end of it
arches.
Does this little slinky action. Yeah, exactly, and kind of plants the back foot and then reaches forward from the front. If the gap between you at your worst and you at your best is too wide, you will experience what people describe as being self-sabotaging or your own worst enemy, because that back end is tripping you up. It's holding you back. You need to consistently eliminate your worst in order for that front end to be able to move forward. That's what all the great athletes do. That's what all the great traders do. They have an understanding of their weak points, and they are relentless at correcting them. They view not knowing their weaknesses as the biggest threat to their progress.
Let's write that one down as well. These are great notes right here. That not knowing your weakness, being blind to your weakness, is the biggest weakness. Is that kind of what you said?
That's the biggest weakness. It's
so
like
good.
It's weak to not know your weaknesses.
To be oblivious of your weaknesses means I really like that, because I look at it as machinery. If I have a car And, I used to drive this old 1968 Dodge Dart, and I left it unlocked with the keys in it. And the reason is I was the only one that could drive it. You couldn't steal that car if you wanted. And here's why. It had a 3 on the tree, 3 on the tree gear shift. And the linkage of it was really screwy. And if you didn't shift this with a certain technique, it would jam and lock. You'd have to pull over, lift up the hood, physically unjam it, and then go. But if you knew how to drive it, you could. And I think it's pretty cool because that car had a flaw in its machinery. Now, anyone who doesn't know what that flaw is, they're going to screw it every time. But if I learn that it's there, and I can identify when it's there, then I can still get along with my machinery. It's not quite perfect, get from A to B. But if you don't know those flaws in your machinery, you don't know that, if this car gets up to 55, it starts to break, or, whatever it is, how you going to, that is brilliant, man. That is huge, is to not know your blind spot is your biggest problem. This is fantastic stuff.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the mid-range traders, the people who are really aspiring to make a lot of money and to be great, they're the ones that are actually harder on their own weaknesses in a negative way. They're more desirable to be blind to them. They think that the presence of them means that they can't achieve their goals when it's literally the exact opposite. Mm-hmm.
This is fantastic stuff. Let me give out your website here before I forget. It's jaredtendler.com, and you can also get on Twitter at Jared Tendler. You're active on Twitter and follow what's going on here. So this is interesting. I have neuroscientists on, I have psychologists on, people like, Andy, why don't you have like economists on? And the reason is experience has taught me this is what I want to get better at. And so I'm going to read books and study with people that can help me recognize this. When you say that we're going to create a system for making decisions, I certainly have a system. And as I've studied the people who are really, really good at this, their systems vary. Some guys have a fundamental system. Some guys have a technical system. Some guys have a quant system. But across the board, people have a system. How do you go about creating a system to improve the mental game?
So there are 3 elements to it, as I describe in the book. The first one is you got to map the problem, as we discussed earlier.
Yep.
The second part is you got to get to the root of the problem. You need to understand what flaws you're dealing with. And then the third step is to develop a strategy that attacks and corrects those flaws in real time as they occur. And then it's about the repetition and training to kind of firmly upgrade and correct those flaws. And when you do that, then you actually achieve resolution, right? And, resolution, for those who don't know that term, or kind of can understand emotionally what that would be like, imagine, a conflict with your spouse. I'm sure, Andy, you know nothing of this, so we'll just focus on your listeners. So, you can imagine when that conflict exists, right, there's real tension, right? But the second you talk through it, in my case, it's, admitting that I was wrong and here's why and here's what I've, and then, and then it's that, then the problem is firmly resolved. And if I have truly learned, then that situation never occurs again, and we might, quarrel again, but it's not going to be for that reason. That is what resolution means. So when you resolve and correct these underlying performance flaws, you are not going to even experience the emotion that would compel you, to kind of FOMO into a trade. It's going to happen, that control happens automatically. All right. Emotional control is a dangerous term, in my opinion. It sounds really good because it's used very widely, but emotional control implies that you, A, have to be aware of your emotions, B, you have to devote mental resources to containing and controlling them. Yeah. So I'm not saying it's bad in the short term, right? Those are 2 things that we want to have. But if you're not actively working towards resolution, then you basically have just given yourself a permanent job to defend yourself against those weaknesses, right? What we want is to use that mental resource, right, the thinking part of our brain, in a surgical fashion in those moments to correct the flaws. And you do that over time. It's like chopping down a tree with an axe, right? So some of you have a big tree. Some of you have a big tree, a blunt axe, and you're weak, right? Over time, though, you can get stronger. The axe gets sharper, and you eventually can chop that sucker down.
So I'm not a trained psychologist, and I probably shouldn't delve into their jargon, but I've read a little bit about this, and I want to see if I'm getting what you're saying. Are you saying that there are neural pathways that get established to create certain mental cognitive habits that we can use that there's this idea of neuroplasticity, that through repetition and laying down different neural pathways, we can actually create habits that are more healthy in terms of our cognitive behaviors and the emotions they produce? Is that close?
Yes. And
I mean, you're literally changing the anatomy of your brain, right? You're changing what your brain is doing, right?
Yeah, I mean, yes, 100%. And so the key is that as you establish those pathways for the system, right, the process, then the inputs can change over time. Because the reality is, right, let's say you were to read my book today to deal with greed or anger, right? 6 months from now, a year from now, if you're actively working to progress, you're going to experience a different set of problems, right? We can't, like, mastering trading psychology doesn't mean you become, like Yoda. You're not going to achieve like this permanence where you never have problems again. It's just going to be, you're going to deal with the next problem. So if you develop these pathways, develop these habits, then it's just about like inputting a new problem into the system, and you just work it again, right? And it becomes quite easy to do.
Let's go back to, let me set up a moment for you. I'm going to put you in a little bit of a situation here, and I'm going to ask you to walk us through what's going to happen in your brain. I'm going to put you in a situation. I'll start. I'm a really lousy basketball player. I was a college bench warmer. So in college, I was big, I was tall, couldn't jump, couldn't shoot, but I could foul. So they paid for some of my school. But so I was on the bench most of the time, and, watching the game in a good seat. That's about as best I had. When I'm coaching these days and it's a tight game and we're down, maybe by 2, and time's run out, so we foul and we put a kid on the line. I got a couple timeouts in my pockets. He goes to the line before the ref gives him the ball. I call timeout. So we're going to ice him. And he's got to go back to that huddle. And it's hilarious because some coaches talk to the player, some don't, some address it. The mental game is real, is what I'm saying. It is absolutely real. And he's got to think about this. And whatever mental weakness that may or may not be there is going to be tested as I ice him and call timeout. And then he comes back ready, and he better know I have another one in my pocket, because I'll call another one and do it again, right? And so you're standing at the foul line, and you have a desire to win the game, and your desire to win the game is so strong, and your fear of not winning the game becomes even stronger, and it just seems to change guys' physiology when you're staring at that task and thinking about it. So that's how it works in basketball. Okay, here you are, Jared. We're going to put you in the time machine. You're back on that green, and there's the putt, and you sink it. You're moving on. You miss it. You end up bogeying this. The dreams are over, and it's not just this game. I mean, it's qualifying, right? It's you hit this, you're in the U.S. Open. You miss this, you're not. It's that simple. Take me through your process. I'm dying to know what's going to happen when you get a second chance of this. Knowing what you know now, what's going to happen on that green?
So the biggest thing is that the background has been taken care of in a way that means that I fundamentally feel different at the moment that I've hit that shot on the green and have the opportunity to make that putt. Right? So because for me, I had these massive expectations for myself, right? And the reason that those expectations were flawed were because an expectation implies a guarantee. And in my mind, subconsciously, I thought that I had guarantees in places that I could not do that, right? As much as PGA Tour players and myself make high percentages of putts from 3 to 4 feet, we don't make 100 of them. We don't make 100% of them. So the fact that I was expecting it actually created the space for the anxiety and the fear to rise, right? Because now I'm expecting something I can't. And then it also made me weaker in terms of my process and my routine, because now when you expect something, your brain kind of shuts off a little bit, right? If you expect the market to be choppy for the next few hours, what do? You check Twitter, you do other stuff. You're not actively staying kind of engaged because you believe you're right. So for me, the biggest change is that. So now when I go into those shots, there's not even the opportunity for that excessive fear or anxiety to arise. Am I feeling it? You damn well bet I am, because I care. It means a lot. But what doesn't happen is that emotion doesn't cross that threshold where it shuts down my ability to think, my ability to process and feel and sense, the subtleties in the grain and the green, or affect my process as I go through my breathing, as I go through, my pre-shot routine that I'll go through to make the putt. Now, will I make it? I can tell you I don't know, right? Because I can't guarantee it. Am I would I be much more likely to? Absolutely.
I play this. It's a little bit different game in the stock market because, my ability to hit a foul shot comes a lot from my motor skills, right? I've shot tens of millions of them. And, when I get up to the foul line, I'm fairly confident because like you in a putt, there's probably about an 80% chance that's going in. One of the things that really helped me as a trader, and I don't know if you can speak to this or if it fits with what you do, but I will take people through possible scenarios. And I usually talk to a beginner trader about 4 of them. I said, well, once you place this trade, you're looking at a couple of things could happen. Number 1, the stock could go up. Number 2, the stock could go down. Number 3, the stock could stay the same. And number 4, it could stay the same for a long, long time. And if we structure a scenario of risk to reward ratios, of upside downside, of exits and hedges, and let's make plan A, B, C, and D. Okay, if the stock goes up as we predict, plan A is to do this, and this will be our result. If the stock goes down, then we hit plan B. We're going to lose some, but this is going to be the result. And if it goes sideways, this will be what happens. And if it goes sideways for a long, long time, maybe we get out with what's called a time stop. And I talk about those 4 scenarios. And I say, let's make our position size, X. And let's see this. Can I live with the result of all of these? In other words, I don't want to lose, but if I did lose and I'd lost just this much, could I live with the result? Could I say, well, that's not the end of the world for me? I think being able to live with the result, for me, really helps remove that. And the way I've taught my son, who's a much better basketball player than I've tried to prepare him mentally as much as physically skilled, is I say, son, let's look at the things we really do have control. We can control whether we enjoy practicing. Do we make it fun? We can control our process, how many shots we shoot, that's in our control. The time of day we do it, that's in our control. And getting to where we can make, 8 out of 10 from the free throw line is in our control. Making 100 out of 100 every time is not in our control. So we're going to enjoy this process and we're going to accept the result, whatever's going to happen. And as soon as you can accept a result, it seems to help, in my opinion. Any thoughts on that?
100%. And the reason is because certainty is established. People don't always realize that the cure to fear is certainty. Right? You're not going to fear something that you kind of know what's going to happen. I mean, if you were, let's say, in a drawdown, a pretty nasty one, but I told you that, over the next 2.5 months, you're going to make more money than you ever had in your life. Instantly, your mentality changes.
Yeah.
So when you are certain that you, as a basketball player, as a man, as an individual, as a performer, can handle whatever comes your way, then there's a degree of mental stability that's established that, again, you lose, you miss, it's still going to be painful, but it's the kind of pain that you can take, right? The same kind of pain that, is sort of endemic in any competitive environment. And so, certainty is established. You remove a lot of the thing that typically can kind of prey on people's weaknesses, which is, just not knowing and wanting to know.
I think it would have served the Reddit traders that when GameStop started picking up all that steam, that movement on Reddit, which is just awful. It's just so not what trading investing is. Would it have served these people to be a detective first? Can you talk about doing detective work on decisions?
Yeah, I mean, I think we got to talk about kind of which of the Redditors we're talking about. Like the first ones in were the detectives. They sort of saw the opportunity. Everybody else is kind of piling in on top of that work.
Yeah.
And I think, there's a trader that I kind of mentioned in the book who kind of got into crypto trading and made a bunch of money and decided to leave his job and all of a sudden found all this stress and volatility. My point in saying this is because he actually wanted to be lucky. he didn't want to be a good trader at his core. And one of the things that I helped him to do was to firmly understand what his choices were all about. There's a lot of people that kind of pile into these opportunities that they just want to make money. And in some respects, they're just looking to buy lottery tickets. That's really all this is about. How you wake up somebody from that is a very difficult thing. Americans...
It'd be like changing someone's political belief or religious belief, right? I mean, it's that deep.
Yeah, it's typically not going to come from the outside, 100%. I mean, Americans are typically overconfident, right? 65 to 80% of people think that they have above average IQ, above average, sense of humor.
I'm a better driver than most people.
There you go. Exactly. And we'll prove it right now. I say so. So, that overconfidence, is a really hard thing to break through. And that's what we're really talking about here. It's like this illusion that we are better than we think that we are. And so that means that, I am justified in making these very risky decisions without any, real understanding. And frankly, like, these are the kinds of people that poker players love to play against, right? Because they are so bad at decision making that they don't even know how bad they are. That's the definition of a fish in a poker game, right? The ones who don't know who the weakest player is, and
then
obviously we know the adage, it's you, right?
Yep.
As a trader, you don't get to see your opponents in that light, so you don't typically kind of get that feedback. And that's why we go back to the truth seeking, right? Being able to look in the mirror and ask yourself, do I know where my risks are? If you ask yourself that question and you don't have an answer, then you know that you're blind in some way.
I absolutely love this conversation. I can't thank you enough. You've been so generous with your time. One of the things I wrote down for my notes from this interview was, ultimately, this is about truth seeking. And really being open. And sometimes if you were to look at the ascension of knowledge, the epistemology pursuit, sometimes you have to let go of one rung to grab the next rung, right? And I think that's a real great test for a real truth seeker. I know that Steve Jobs, one of the quotes I have on my wall that was life-changing for me is he said, "Don't be trapped by dogma." Because something declares something's true. Now, if we accept that, we're going to live with the results of his thinking, true or not. And I love what you said, that ultimately is about truth seeking. It reminds me of an ancient prayer, from the cowardice that shrinks from new truth, from the laziness that's content with half truth, and from the arrogance that thinks it knows all the truth. Oh, God of truth, deliver us. And the arrogance of thinking you know the truth is astounding to me in Democrats, Republicans, different dogmas of the world. One religious belief absolutely knows that their tradition is, they'll die, they'll fall on their sword for it, right? And others, same thing. So this idea of seeking truth is huge. If there are 28 things that you've been able to identify that are consistent in human beings, 28 different things about us that would be worth noticing and learning about to improve upon, I want to know what those 28 things are. How do you find out? You go to Amazon. It's pretty easy. You go to Amazon.com and you get the Mental Game of Trading, step-by-step system for mastering trading psychology. What you'll find is, what I found whenever I've studied neuroscience or psychology and read books like this, I found that it's not only about trading, it winds up being about your marriage, about your ability to be a father, a citizen, a friend. It affects, because anytime you're making decisions, this stuff comes up. It doesn't matter what the realm is, this stuff comes up, and it's just invaluable. So let's analyze this decision logically. If I had the chance to take Jared out to dinner and pick up the tab for a nice steak, that would cost a lot more than this book would. And the steak, I'd get to pick his brain for maybe, an hour at dinner. Here, I know as a guy who's written books, you put your heart and soul in a book, and there is a lifetime of experience that's gone into this. And what you have to glean is more valuable than it's interesting. When you're an author, you're not selling, cheeseburgers. You're selling personal development. And money spent on a cheeseburger is one thing, in the drive-through, but money spent on personal development is among the best investments a person makes. So I think that's a clear decision, and I think I've infused some logic there, injected some. JaredTendler.com is the website, Tendler, at Jared Tendler on Twitter. Any final words before we close the podcast? You've been fantastic.
Thanks, Andy. This is great. I love the summary, and yeah, I think investment is the right decision, right? Investment is going to be something that yields a return, whether it's with my client work or whether it's with my books. I've always tried to provide the highest return possible, and you're right. I mean, there's a lot of this that kind of carries over to people's personal lives, and I found that containing these issues and talking about them in a performance sphere makes it easier to understand and digest. Sometimes life is too messy to kind of contain like this. But if you learn the system within the sphere of performance, whether it's investing or trading, then the system can work for you elsewhere. And certainly one of the most gratifying things I hear is when I get comments either from clients or people on Twitter or emails that talk about how it's helped them in their personal lives. So the system can work for you if you do the work.
Jared, I wish you the best. Folks, this has been the Cashflow Academy podcast, where we've had the chance to talk about trading psychology with Jared Tendler. One more time, his book is called The Mental Game of Trading, a step-by-step system for mastering trading psychology. You can learn more about him at jaredtendler.com. Until then, we'll be working on our trading psychology, at least in my household, and I'll be dissecting and further studying this book. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the Cashflow Academy podcast with Andy Tanner. For more information on investing made easy, go to thecashflowacademy.com.